have a hat that says 100K, and I probably wore that hat for 3 years aspirationally. Here we are, and it's bearish. So I guess that's how things go. These technological innovations, these paradigm shifts, are always rejected by the normal scientists working within the existing paradigm. That's kind of like this acceptance of like no one is bullish enough, because it's almost like saying, okay, I think Bitcoin is a paradigm shift and we're living in the old paradigm. Therefore, our monkey brains cannot actually connect to what's on the other side of this. We don't have enough information to accurately forecast that. So therefore, all the sats that you have today, if you forecast them into the future, they're much, much, much more valuable than they are at present day exchange rates. So it's an enormous responsibility to just get the sats you already have across the finish line, if you will, to the other side of the paradigm shift.
Hi, CK. How are you doing? Everything fine on your end?
Yeah, life is good. Feeling blessed. How you doing, Robin?
Really, really good. Yeah, it's been interesting to being in Bitcoin, because it seems like the bears are coming out. I don't know
It feels
about you,
a little bearish, which is crazy.
It's crazy, man. It's like max fear over 100K. It's like, yeah, 100. Like I had the same sentiment when we hit, in 2022, the 16K. And now we're just like, I don't know, 5x or 6x higher than that.
Yeah, I mean, I probably wore the wrong hat. But I should have wore my 100K hat. But I have a hat that says 100K, and I probably wore that hat for 3 years aspirationally. So here we are, and it's bearish. So I guess that's how things go.
Absolutely, yeah. What is for you the most interesting thing, or like, what is the thing that excites you currently the most in Bitcoin that you're kind of thinking about now?
Ooh, that is a good question. I mean, I'm always thinking about how everyone is not bullish enough. But, what I really think is interesting is I think the like Bitcoin core, Bitcoin knots, consensus, spam, defend the network debate is actually super, super healthy and super positive for Bitcoin enthusiasts and for the overall science that is Bitcoin. Like, we are learning about how consensus works. I think if you go back to the block size wars, the same could be said as well. And obviously, there were hurt feelings and battles and rage quits and all those kind of things in 2017. And there was a fork. Hopefully there's nothing like that in this process. But I have started to like really look at the process as like, we are living in the times, right, where we are figuring this out. And I think it's super, super healthy for Bitcoin and like the overall Bitcoin ecosystem that this conversation is happening, right? Because like, how do we figure out the edges of consensus and like how this thing works? It's by like rubbing up against it. So, I used to be kind of, I would say like benevolent, but like negative towards the filter / knots crowd. And now I would say I'm generally optimistic about the whole process and just kind of like figuring out and observing what happens.
It's also, I think, a maturing process, because we've seen the block size war was about something very fundamental, and the whole up return thing is not as fundamental as the block size limit is. And so I think it's almost like a sign that and then I had Thomas Strollite on recently, and he mentioned it's like we are winning so strong in Bitcoin that we don't have a big enemy now outside of Bitcoin, so we are starting infightings now.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot about early kind of religion and then Bitcoin. I personally think like the future of religion on Earth is like the new religion, not the old religions. I think the old religions will continue and people will follow them, but like new religions will continue to be discovered, invented, whatever. And I think the newest ones that are going to be added are already being added to kind of like the human mind space are technological theologies. So I think about the connection between like what is happening with technology today and then historically. And something really interesting about the early Christians is they kind of went from obscure to like dominant, but persecuted by the masses and by the Romans. And then finally, they got a Roman emperor that was Christian and was like positive towards them. That was Emperor Constantine. And then throughout Constantine's reign, he was just trying to get the Christians to get along so that way they can just dominate. But the Christians just insisted on fighting about every little thing, right? And like there are some rhymes that to that here, right? Whereas like Bitcoin is winning, but we're fighting about every little thing. You know, there's these purity tests, you know, and we're trying to like, you know, find the blasphemers and you know and kick out the heretics. There's definitely some rhymes to what is happening today within Bitcoin, but again, like, look, you know, these kind of fights and councils and things like that within the Christian base is why eventually it became a unified thing ish, kind of, you know, kind of. But I would say Christianity right now is very much like a very unified ish force moving forward. And it was much, much, much more decentralized. And you know, from a investigative, like what is happening perspective, it was much more diverse. I would say, you know, in the early days, and there's a lot of, you know, kind of infighting amongst the Christians, even when they finally went from persecuted to they were in charge. They still kept fighting, and Constantine was like, "Can we just all get along so we can win?" And you know, obviously, I don't think he ever fully succeeded in that.
It's interesting to think about Bitcoin as not just technology, but as a movement, because we have those Bitcoin. We talked about before recording. We talked about those Bitcoin conferences, which doesn't seem like normal conferences, almost like celebrations of Bitcoin, where we come together as a culture. Is Bitcoin kind of setting up to be a stronger movement that will live beyond the early days of an innovation hub? Like usually in the early days, there's like strong niche communities come together, but then like Bitcoin could maybe live beyond that, and just it's not just about money; it's more about like freedom and sovereignty and all of that.
Maybe, yeah, I don't know. It's difficult to fully pin it down. You know, I kind of see the two areas where there are some sort of like meaningfulness from technology that people are gaining is like this kind of like building towards general intelligence and super intelligence, and then what is happening in the Bitcoin space. Like that's what I'm seeing. You know, maybe that there's some of this stuff also in the genetics and the longevity space too, of like there is like this technologically driven goal that is motivating people to organize and move forward. So I definitely think that if Bitcoin is successful, if Bitcoin is actually a paradigm shift, that humans will start coalescing around the blockchain or the time chain and start, you know, thinking of it in terms of what its significance truly is, which is, you know, what Bitcoiners are already celebrating. Yeah, I mean, why not? You know, I think like that would upset a lot of people, because I think there's a lot of people who really feel strongly about existing orthodoxies, and they are also interested in Bitcoin. You know, I generally have like a much more fluid but also very respectful view of, you know, what is the purpose of religion in terms of like human society. So I definitely think that, you know, within my view of, you know, religion as an organizing principle, as a scaling mechanism, that Bitcoin definitely has an opportunity to kind of fit into whatever the future of that is for humanity.
Really interesting. Now, the question that I actually wanted to start off with today is, why do you think that still nobody is bullish enough here at the end of 2025?
Okay. I think we may have talked about this a little bit the first time I joined the show. But the way that I think about Bitcoin is, you know, Bitcoin is a technology, and there's really three logical outcomes for Bitcoin. Outcome number one is the status quo. So what is Bitcoin today? Bitcoin is an asset amongst assets. So Bitcoin can definitely go up within that mental model. But in that mental model, Bitcoin never becomes the denominator of money. It does not become the way that we measure value. It still is measured in other things. It is an asset amongst asset. It doesn't demonetize real estate. It's just an asset alongside real estate. It doesn't demonetize gold. It's just an asset alongside gold. So that is scenario number one, the status quo we are currently living in. I think most people, that is how they view Bitcoin, is from those lens. The next scenario is the Bitcoin failure scenario, which I think is like a scenario that needs to be taken very seriously. And it's not a non-zero scenario that Bitcoin fails. I don't think that Bitcoin fails because of what like altcoiners say, which is that Bitcoin fails because of their better altcoin. You know, if Bitcoin fails, it's going to be because of game theoretical issues with Bitcoin, right? So the mining is not able to be incentivized, or the infighting creates a splintering, and then ultimately the network falls apart. Or maybe Bitcoin does become co-opted from a mining pool or node or KYC perspective. Like these are the kind of like fail scenarios for Bitcoin. And the way that I see it is like, and there's also the opportunity for future innovation that we don't see coming to also be a failure scenario for Bitcoin. So quantum computing, maybe some future altcoin that doesn't exist today. These are always like potential things. Personally, I don't think that there's a very high scenario, but I think it's a non-zero chance that Bitcoin does fail, right? And then what is scenario number three, or logical outcome number three for Bitcoin? That is hyper Bitcoinization. So that is Bitcoin is a paradigm shift. So there is a really interesting book about paradigm shifts. It's called why am I blanking out really quick? It's called The Structure of Science by Thomas Kuhn. So The Structure of Science is pretty much a book about paradigm shifts. And in the book, he talks about there are paradigm shifts, and then there is normal science within a paradigm. So imagine, there's a great there's a great essay by Robert Breedlove called Bitcoin and the Number Zero. And in this essay, Robert Breedlove talks about how, in a world where there's Roman numerals and other counting methods, it's difficult to do very, very complex math that is needed to send rockets into space, right? It's difficult to do calculus and this kind of stuff with Roman numerals because it doesn't scale well. You have to as the numbers get bigger, the actual physical space that each number takes is bigger, right? From the Eastern world, there's this idea of zero, negative numbers, as well as, a way to scale numbers better, which is our modern number system. And that's all based on the invention of this idea that zero itself is a number. So that was rejected and fought. And even the Roman Church, the Western Church, forbade zero, right? But ultimately, the real life utility of zero and using those systems to have much more complex math, and what that enabled from an architectural perspective, that was eventually accepted, and then boom, you get the Renaissance, right? So these technological innovations, these paradigm shifts, are always rejected by the normal scientists working within the existing paradigm. So if you are a mathematician on the Roman numeral system, you will reject the future paradigm shift of zero all the way until it's undeniable. And then there's a crisis within this world that, hey, it's undeniable that our system is worse. And then there's a shift. And then there's new normal science within zero. Like, we've been living within that, right? We've had this kind of current day mathematical paradigm, and people are doing science within that paradigm, and they are moving things forward, but iteratively within the paradigm. But if there's going to be some new math system, some new number system that actually innovates beyond zero and our current math system, the current way that we do numbers, it will be rejected again. right? So there's this idea of like, there is a paradigm shift. That paradigm creates like the base layer of the way that people practice science. And the people practicing science within that paradigm, in that existing base layer of reality, they will never be able to see the new reality coming in, the new science coming in. So if you think of Bitcoin as potentially being a paradigm shift, then you see all the things that are happening in terms of rejection of Bitcoin, in terms of resistance and trying to find alternatives to Bitcoin, as actually signs that this is being rejected by normal science. The science of who is the most likely to dismiss Bitcoin still today? It's the practitioners of the existing financial system, right? Like they're the one, like they are still the holdouts, right? They are the normal scientists of economics, right? So within this idea of Bitcoin could be a paradigm shift, or Bitcoin is a paradigm shift, no one is bullish enough, because no one in the old paradigm can actually fully comprehend what the new paradigm is going to bring. No one realized that the introduction of penicillin would enable open heart surgery, right? Like no one was bullish enough on penicillin. No one was bullish enough on zero. No one was bullish enough on electrification, right? Like there is propaganda of electrification zapping and burning down a whole village because of this fear of like, if you electrify, it's going to like add this like danger to the atmosphere. And no one realized that, oh, electrification equals you can do this video call. You're in Europe, I'm in the West Coast. I'm drinking my coffee. It's the end of the day where you are, and we are recording an interview. That's because of electrification. No one was bullish enough on electrification. So if Bitcoin is in fact a paradigm shift, then no one is bullish enough within the current paradigm of what is happening. So I know that was very roundabout, but I hope that makes sense.
I love that. And yes, we covered it last time. I feel like we should cover it almost in the beginning of every episode we do together, because I think it's such a profound thing. And it's kind of wild that not more people speak about that. It's kind of wild that not more people get that if Bitcoin is successful, then it will be hugely successful. And only in the situation where it's not successful, it's like I have a hard time believing that the middle outcome is like realistic. So I personally think that like it's either going to be a paradigm shift, or like we overlook something and we have some logical flaw and it's just like a complete failure. I have a hard time believing that Bitcoin kind of stays in the middle and doesn't do anything. Maybe if like bank co-opted and
you're saying
Bitcoin
the status
gets to be a bank
quo.
coin.
Yeah, I think
exactly.
the status. Yeah, I was talking to Jeff Booth about this a few years ago, and I was kind of like, as I was coming up with this 3 logical scenarios for Bitcoin, and he said, if it stays in the status quo forever, eventually it goes to failure. So he sees the status quo as like the route to either paradigm shift or failure. But I think it's really important to identify the status quo outcome for Bitcoin, because I actually think that that is the mental model that like 95, 99% of Bitcoin enthusiasts are coming from. And that is why no one is bullish enough. Like thinking about it from the status quo perspective is thinking about it from modern, current, economic science perspective. And like to be bullish enough, you have to say Bitcoin is a paradigm shift. Therefore, it alters what is the science of economics. And then in that case, like you have to actually be living in like the new science built on Bitcoin to even understand like where it's going to go. So that's kind of like this acceptance of like no one is bullish enough, because it's almost like saying, okay, I think Bitcoin is a paradigm shift and we're living in the old paradigm. Therefore, our monkey brains cannot actually connect to what's on the other side of this. We don't have enough information to accurately forecast that.
It's almost like figuring out what in 1990, figuring out what's coming in 2025 with the introduction of the internet, TCP, IP, the World Wide Web, and all of that came to be. And then it's like, yeah, what will happen in 30, 40 years? Like most people probably like massively underpriced all of those things. I think we are thinking too much in linear thoughts.
Yeah, that's again, we are all in scenario number one baseline, right? Which is Bitcoin status quo baseline. Which is like, once you understand that, then it makes a lot of sense why no one is bullish enough.
Did you ever put probabilities on that? Did you ever think like to say like there's like probabilities of failure? You said before like non-zero, obviously, but like, did you ever think about like what could be like a logical probability of those things?
I don't think about that very much. I think like, when you understand that there's realistically three scenarios, then I think you tend not to like go all in on anything. I really believe in just responsibly accumulating Bitcoin and then living your life in the now and, doing things in order to protect your family and your Bitcoin. So I think like of this holistic view of getting from the current paradigm to a paradigm where the sats are insanely valuable compared to today. And I think it's more than just accumulating Bitcoin. It is like a holistic thing of protecting yourself, focusing on longevity, and focusing on security and even defense, if you will. So I think like it is very, very important to have a holistic view of like the long run when you understand that there are several scenarios as well as the opportunity for your sats to go from $1 equals 900 something sats to one sat equals $1 or one sat equals generational wealth. I think that there is a path for that. And so therefore all the sats that you have today, if you forecast them into the future, they're much, much, much more valuable than they are at present day exchange rates. So it's an enormous responsibility to just get the sats you already have across the finish line, if you will, to the other side of the paradigm shift.
Yeah, I 100% agree with that. Now, there is in 2025, especially over the summer, more and more of treasury companies. I mean, they are here since a longer time. How do you look at them? Is this also something where people are maybe too bullish or like not bullish enough on treasury companies?
So I see the current treasury companies as, there was like a big flurry of activity at the beginning of the summer. And in hindsight, that was a little bit of a local top signal. I think like when it comes to the treasury companies and should you be bullish on a particular treasury company, I think that not all of them are created equal. Not all of them have the same terms as MicroStrategy or strategy in terms of the terms on their debt, etc., and their cost basis for Bitcoin. So I guess like my holistic view of them is that during the dot-com bubble, there was like a dot-com bubble of tech companies. They all blew up, and then the real tech companies came into play, and then every company became a tech company from a dot-com perspective. Every company had a website. Every company had technological, hardware and software powering it. So, there was like an arc of it is marketing to there are real game-changing organizations in technology to every company is a technology company. So I think that the Bitcoin company movement will follow a very similar arc. Like, I really like to base my mental models of the future on the past. Like, I always like to find analogies to the past, not because the past is predictive, but I think it gives you a lot of information about how humans react to things and it gives you a lot of information about how technology is distributed through a population. So when I look at the big, like if Bitcoin is a paradigm shift, like the World Wide Web was a paradigm shift, then from a company perspective, you're going to see the early adopters, the early bubble, the marketing phase. Then you're going to see the real companies emerge, and then every company will become a Bitcoin company, right? So like that's like the 1, 2, 3 steps. So I think we're still in the early stages of like the dot-com bubble equivalent of the treasury company thing. And there's a lot of pets.com out there right now. And that's a famous company. It's a very big URL. It had a very, very big, evaluation. But really it was like a shitty Chewy's if you are in the US. Chewy's is like a way that you can order pet food and pet material and prescriptions online. It was just like a very early and very bad version of that. Ultimately, Amazon, completely became the real business and ate its lunch and built AWS and everything that they built. But yeah, I think a lot of the treasury companies are the equivalent of pets.com. And I am very confident that if Bitcoin is a paradigm shift, that there will be valuable Bitcoin companies. But I also think that every company will be holding Bitcoin. And I'm very interested in the world where it's not like some scam zombie company trying to save its balance sheet and save its stock, to when Google and when Apple not just start accumulating Bitcoin, but are using Bitcoin as a technology for their money, a technology for their treasury, a technology for their value. And that is like that is like when real companies start using Bitcoin for real. And I wrote an article a few years ago on Bitcoin Magazine. It's called the Sovereign Company Thesis. But a lot of it is kind of built on a book that is, I think you talked about in the 90s, if you could forecast what's going to happen into the future. Well, there was a book that did that. It was called The Sovereign Individual, published in 1997. So it was written before then, and it predicted COVID lockdowns. It predicted Bitcoin. It predicted remote work. It predicted so much stuff, and really, really, really directionally correct book. And I think everyone thought that they were crazy people for a very long time. But the sovereign company thesis is that, okay, as countries start to compete, we are also going to see companies become sovereign because of sovereignty enabling technology like Bitcoin. And if they use Bitcoin in a sovereign way, they can actually become nation state resistant. So a great example of this was BitMEX. So I think it was like 2020 or 2021, BitMEX was getting taken down by the US government. But something super interesting happened. BitMEX held and did all of their operations in Bitcoin, and they used a multi-sig. So while like the takedown was going down, BitMEX was they offered a withdrawal schedule, and they were operating Bitcoin withdrawals to their customers the entire time. No matter, like, even though the biggest country on the planet was taking it down and eventually got all of its people into custody, and then they had a deal, and then now Arthur Hayes lives in Miami and trades shitcoins and writes a blog. When the takedown was happening, BitMEX, their money was not frozen. They effectively, what the government normally do is freeze all their assets, take all their assets, and then those assets are frozen until there's a court case and all that kind of stuff. But that was not able to happen. They were actually able to exit the business during the takedown, take care of their customers, and they retained funds that enabled them to get a favorable ruling and get a favorable outcome, right? And so what happens when a company like Facebook, that is already bigger than most countries in terms of its influence and its power from a geopolitical perspective, adopts Bitcoin for real? Like, uses jurisdictional arbitrage to have its executives in different jurisdictions, and uses a multi-sig so no country can freeze its assets. This is a world that no one is like thinking about in terms of like their war planning, if you will. I think like Bitcoin opens the door for a lot of alternative organizing to happen outside of like the existing power structure of, do you have a nuke? Do you have, armies on the ground in a geography? Do you have citizens within that geography? Okay, that's the top dog. I think that Bitcoin changes that organizing principle. If it is a paradigm shift, but also even with its current feature sets today as an asset amongst assets, it already does that.
I want to tell you about something very special to me. It's called Microseed. If you hold your Bitcoin in self-custody, and you should, you know how critical it is to secure your seed phrase. You should not have them on paper. You should not have them on anything else than titanium. With Microseed, you can engrave your 12 or 24 word seed phrase, the entire seed phrase, onto a 1-inch small washer. Yes, just one washer. All 24 words on that one washer. You can hide that thing everywhere. And even better, you don't need to buy a new kit every time you have to get a new wallet. You can make unlimited backups because Microseed is not selling the washer. Microseed is selling the device that stamps the washer. So you get the full kit with the device, with the washers, with the hammer, with everything you need to get started today. And you can make with that unlimited amount of backups. Go now to microseed.io. Again, that's microseed.io to get your last backup tool you ever need. The most important thing for your Bitcoin journey is not buying Bitcoin, but it's how to keep them. And yes, you have maybe the right tools, but how do you actually go ahead and stick it all together so it's the most secure for you personally? Self-custody is a deeply personalized journey, and the Bitcoin way is helping you exactly finding that correct setup for you personally. They are also helping you with securing your own cybersecurity. And if you want to go one step above all that, you can even get a consultation for a Plan B residency. Go to thebitcoinway.com/Robin and you will get a 30-minute free consultation. I finally and officially mine Bitcoin. This is not just something to stack more Satoshis, but it's most importantly also to support the network. Individual miners are the ones that keep the Bitcoin network decentralized. And by the way, you get KYC-free Bitcoin. That's why I use simplemining. I get an actual proper Bitcoin miner. They set it up for me. They repair it if it breaks down. And most importantly, they let me choose the pool and even connect my own full node. I'm completely sovereign and I'm completely in control, and I can sign up with Ocean, no account needed. I just give them a Bitcoin address and then there's mining going on. No KYC, nothing. So if you're ready to mine Bitcoin, go to simplemining.io, tell them you come from Robin, and let's mine Bitcoin together. I never thought about that. It's fascinating. The geographically distributed multi-signature setup for CEOs of big companies. So if they have, let's say, I don't know, like a 7 out of 4 or 4 out of 7 thing going on, and they have 7 different locations all across 7 different continents, and you need at least 4 to sign something big, all of a sudden you have a company vault that's basically unbreakable because it's almost impossible to have like court cases against all of them, and then at the same time, and they have to sign it. So like that's fascinating. Why did I never think about? Like I thought, like multi-signature, all that is like really interesting, but I never really thought about that for company structure and what that means for their funds to not be distributed while a company is sued in one country, because then you need the USA, Europe, maybe even China, like all of them to work together against one company, which probably will never happen, that those countries working in that fashion together. That is fascinating. I never thought about that.
I wrote about it in December 2020. So I just linked the article in the chat here. So yeah, I mean, look, we haven't seen a lot develop since BitMEX in that department, but I definitely think like that is going to become ubiquitous as, you know, different organizations adopt Bitcoin. They're going to start adopting all of Bitcoin's features, not just the monetary feature, but also the sovereignty features.
I just bring it up. Wait, I'll show it to people, but for some reason my cursor does not work at the moment with that. I think my browser just froze. Oh, it's back.
You're getting DDoS. The feds don't want this conversation to happen, Robin.
Yeah, I will just show it in the current format. It's a little weird, but That's all I can do right now. This is the article, the sovereign company features. That's really interesting. I have to look. I have to read this article afterwards, because of course, it was in my mind. As like you have the multi-signature setup, but I always had it on individuals and how they manage it. And I thought about families also. If you have like a family wealth fund or something like that, and you're like a 7-head family, you can actually distribute it amongst it, and so it's harder for the family to get kind of broken up financially. And then you have the same thing with companies. Imagine Amazon or Facebook, or like they have headquarters everywhere. They can make a 10 out of like 20 or multi-signatures. That's crazy to me that I never thought about that. That's really interesting stuff.
Yes, sir. I mean, look, no one's bullish enough on where this goes. And like, I'm barely scratching the surface. I'm not trying to say I'm bullish enough. Like, but I think acknowledgement of in a paradigm shift scenario that we can't be bullish enough enables you to be more bullish.
Yeah, well, absolutely. The thought of you saying like, hey, I don't know the things that might be happening from that is already like massively. I also liked that you framed it as the Bitcoin treasury companies is just a thing that will not be a term anymore, because every company will be, it's almost saying like, oh, it's an internet company. Like, yeah, like which company isn't an internet company at this point? It's the same thing as like will happen with Bitcoin. It's like, yeah, it's a Bitcoin company. Yeah. Yeah, of course, it's a Bitcoin company. They use Bitcoin as the
Yeah. Well,
saving
look,
model.
people always are like, hey, are government going to embrace Bitcoin? And, my answer to them is, okay, what government doesn't use internet, doesn't use a website, doesn't have email? Maybe North Korea. I don't know. They probably still do it too. Maybe Cuba does it too, right? Like, so yes, if Bitcoin is a paradigm shift, every company, every country will embrace it.
You brought that up because I think we might be with Bitcoin treasury companies right before the 2000s with the .com bubble, that we aren't yet there where there's a huge boom in treasury companies. I think it sometimes feels like that, but I think it's still like very small. Then there's like a huge bust of that, and then we slowly get to the point where everyone is adopting it. Do you see the same way that we are like still like in the, I don't know, 97 or 98 area before the huge .com thing with treasury companies?
Yeah, it's difficult to say. Things feel very bearish for treasury companies right now. It feels like they're dragging Bitcoin down. But I do think, if I have to like put my predicting hat on, that I agree with your analysis that we are in the earlier stages of ultimately what's going to be a much larger Bitcoin treasury bubble.
I think so too. One other thing is, because we think about new technologies and paradigm shifts, and I don't think we've talked about that last time. It's how do you compare Bitcoin and AI when we think about two big paradigms? I think this is probably the two biggest ones that are currently happening, at least how I see it. How do you compare those two in terms of like how they affect our daily lives and how huge they will be in the future?
Yeah, I mean, look, I'm not an AI expert. I think like I am much more in tune with the Bitcoin space. But what I have found is really interesting is that AI and the science behind the current models that people are finding a lot of success using and building products around is that AI is actually older than public-private key cryptography. So AI has been worked on for a long, long time, and there's actually been multiple AI bubbles and winters. So I think of things from like the innovation, like the fusion of innovation principle, which is that technology, the way it's adopted, is first with early adopters and or early innovators, early adopters, and then crossing the chasm is when you go into the early majority. And then if you are successful within the early majority, eventually it's completely adopted. So a lot of people can relate to this technological innovation diffusion concept when you think of smartphones. So like think about when you've got your first smartphone, and then how, like, did you get the first iPhone? Were you a little bit later? Did you get it in college? And then think about when grandma got an iPad, right? Like grandma's the laggard, and the technology has gotten so good at that point that grandma's into it, right? But the early days, when the first iPhone came out, people were like, no, I still like my BlackBerry better. That didn't last very long. So I actually remember when the first businessman I knew, I was in high school at the time, he went to my church, and he was like, yeah, we switched to iPhone. So I remember that. And like, I think like that was crossing the chasm probably. And like thinking through, okay, once he switched to iPhone, it didn't take that long where, 3 years later, no one I knew didn't have a smartphone, so that's when you go early majority, late majority, and then grandma got it as a laggard. So, just to like, rewind back, yeah, I mean, I just think through it from those perspectives. Sorry, I actually lost where I was. What was the initial question?
I forgot the initial question too, but we talking about the innovators and the early maturity in Bitcoin. And the initial question was, how do you compare AI and
Yes,
Bitcoin
okay,
as
perfect.
a thing?
So, yeah. So, if AI is older than Bitcoin, right? If LLMs are older than Bitcoin, and then AI has gone through what we would recognize as like a Bitcoin winter, many AI winters where optimism completely dried out. It was only the diehard people still working on it, building, getting to this point. And then 2022 ChatGPT hits, and that's like the first product market fit that hit with this technology. And then it went from very obscure to ChatGPT became the fastest growing product ever. And it was built on existing infrastructure, right? So ChatGPT could become the fastest growing technology ever because everyone already had an iPhone. Everyone already had a smartphone, right? Everyone already had a PC or Mac on their desks. So without that infrastructure being there, it could not become the fastest growing product ever. So I see that as like, there's several lessons here. One is if you are building towards a paradigm shift, at some point it shifts. And then you go from AI will never happen to NVIDIA is clearly the most valuable company on the planet. And everyone is trying to figure out how to embrace AI and build it into what they're doing, right? So Bitcoiners should use that as like, this is what Bitcoin will look like if it shifts. At some point, it's going to go from pure resistance, pure bull and bear, to paradigm shift, product market fit. Everyone's trying to embrace it as fast as they can. Like that is what happens when you cross the chasm. So actually it annoys me when people are like, oh, we've crossed the chasm already. I think Bitcoin's actually a household name already, which is very good. The brand is very strong. But Cornell's done some research. The awareness of the most basic rudimentary Bitcoin principle, which is that it's a fixed supply asset with 21 million coins, is not known by over 83% of worldwide survey recipient or responders. So while like Bitcoin had like 80% household recognition across many age groups, less than 20% even know that it's a fixed supply asset. And even worse, 60% had no idea at all that Bitcoin has any monetary limit. They had no idea at all. So while Bitcoin is a household name, I don't think that Bitcoin has crossed the chasm from an adoption perspective. But when it does, it's going to look a lot like LLMs becoming widely accepted and admired, and people are striving to integrate them. So sorry, I lost my place there. I had to kind of like go through steps of the technology adoption, but I really do think like AI is older than Bitcoin, and AI is showing us today in Bitcoin what the mass adoption of Bitcoin and the sentiment shift from negative to positive on Bitcoin will look like if we are successful, if we actually cross the chasm. So we have not crossed the chasm until every bank, every business, every person is trying to be a Bitcoin expert and entrepreneur and innovator, right? That is the sign that we are crossing the chasm.
And you think there is some app or something that will be developed that kind of pushes us over the chasm, over the edge, to get into the sphere as ChatGPT did for AI?
Maybe it's an app, maybe it's knowledge. Maybe it's strictly going from 17% understanding that Bitcoin has a fixed supply to 40% understanding Bitcoin has a fixed supply. And I think like if 100% of people understands that Bitcoin is a fixed supply asset, we will have a lot more users, because all of a sudden a fixed supply asset from a math perspective starts to make a lot of sense. And it's very interesting. I know some finance people that are now starting to understand Bitcoin of like it is a fixed supply technology asset. And they're like, this is the most bullish thing on the planet. Like it's programmed to go up. So I do think that it might not even be like a killer app that doesn't already exist, but strictly just a diffusion of the understanding of the most rudimentary concept behind Bitcoin, which is that it is a credibly fixed supply asset. It's not just a fairy tale. It's actually credibly fixed supply.
It's interesting how few people understand that and are aware of that. And then there are people that even attack it. I don't know if you've seen that there was some guy on Twitter today that was trying to use Grok to confirm his bias. And he was kind of saying something like, oh, Grok, please explain this guy, like a 10-year-old, why the Bitcoin supply cap is a fallacy. And Grok replied, it's not a fallacy. it's something real, and it's actually and then he gave her like a very long answer, and then he called out like, oh, like Grok is BS. But it's interesting how people, like there's a huge group of people that are not aware of this simple fact, and then there's even a small group of people that like kind of trying to fight that that fact. So there's like only a very small group of people that understand that fact and understands the strength of that and what it actually means.
Yeah, look, if according to the structure of science, that is a proof that there is a paradigm shift that could be happening, is the resistance. The resistance is like, without resistance, no paradigm shift.
Because we have to challenge the status quo.
Yeah.
And
no, you have to crush the status quo. You have to destroy the status quo. You have to make the status quo irrelevant. So there must be pushback, because everything to this point is built on the status quo. That is a fact of a paradigm.
That's super interesting, yeah. One last thing that I wanted to get into podcast, because I think it's under discussed topic, and you're working at the Human Rights Foundation. What Bitcoin is basically doing outside of money, outside of the thing that we always talk about, like it's going up in monetary value, like it does to treasury companies, all of that. Why are you bullish on the Human Rights Foundation? What are you, or like differently asked, why are you bullish on Bitcoin for human rights?
Totally. Well, I think if you look at the forward trajectory of humanity, it's better living conditions for more people, and the ability to provide better living conditions to more people. That is the upward march of humanity. So I think that in the grand scheme of things, we will look in hindsight on the existing monetary paradigm as a paradigm that required 7/8 of the planet to live in destitution. So 1/8 of the planet could have a high quality of life and a high living standard and predictability and control over their wealth and their value and the production, the fruits of their labor. Only 1/8 can have the highest level of security around their finances, while 7/8 must live in destitution. And then we're going to look at Bitcoin as the thing that brought the 7/8 online, that actually gave the 7/8 of the planet better control and better sovereignty and better ability to capture the fruits of their labor than the 1/8 had in the old paradigm. And what you can see from the works that Gladstein has done and has really pioneered in his books Hidden Repression and Check Your Financial Privilege is that the fiat monetary system and the kind of like historic place that our financial system has gotten to is very good for dictators, and is very good for oppression, and is very good for imperialism. It is a fantastic tool for all of those activities. And all of those things, I think, are ultimately negative for human rights and people who want to advance human rights. Human rights are advanced through liberty. Human rights are advanced through respect. Human rights are advanced through mutual trade. So fiat is actually a weapon against those principles. Fiat enables dictators to demonetize. Fiat enables the French government to continue its colonialism over West Africa. Fiat enables North Americans and American people living in the United States to export their inflation to other countries that are dollar holding. Fiat is a mechanism against liberty, against respect, against mutual cooperation and mutual trade. So if Bitcoin can replace fiat and become the asset that everyone uses to store and think about value, to measure value, to enable trade, to take down the ability for dictators to freeze the funds of the people who are resisting them, if it just equals out the playing field and gives everyone equal access to the best money, the best asset that has ever been invented, that's ever been created, it has done an enormous amount for advancing liberty and for advancing human rights, as well as advancing prosperity. Because like, if you believe in why human rights matter and why liberty matters, is because those things unlock prosperity. And what authoritarianism unlocks is destitution, and it's mining of resources, exploitation. So if Bitcoin can bring the 7/8 of people living in destitution online, imagine the prosperity that unlocks for humanity, to go from you require 7/8 to live in destitution so we can mine them and their resources so that the 1/8 can have high levels of quality of life, to now potentially everyone can have a much, much higher level of quality of life. It fits into the no one is bullish enough, thesis, which is like, this is a paradigm shift that is going to be good for humanity. It's a paradigm shift that is going to unlock further prosperity. It's a paradigm shift that is going to align incentives for everyone to have a better world. And, I think it's part of the forward march of humanity. So like, I think this is part of a larger trend, which is better quality of life for more people.
I love that. And it's, as I said in the beginning, it's an under-discussed topic, I feel like, because people obviously care of like their own stack and how it grows and what it buys them. But especially in the Western civilization, in which like most listeners here are from the Western, like USA, like Europe, Canada, Australia, UK, all of those places. I often don't realize how those small things we have, for example, here in Austria with like bank transfer go quickly. Like I can literally, drop like euros in and out from bank accounts very easily. And just having a bank account, having the possibility, if you want a credit, you can get a credit like very easily and fast, like literally within 15 minutes, I have like a quick credit, which is expensive, but like I can get a quick credit for those things. And so all those TradFi thing that we are kind of blessed towards, in a sense. I know like how bad fiat is, but like those things kind of bring a lot of things, to the 1/8 of the world. And they don't realize that like 7/8 of the world, as you said, like suffer because of that. And, this is kind of an awakening for me. It's like, oh shit, like the thing we're doing here and profiting from, is actually harming like, most people on the planet Earth.
Well, look, that's why Bitcoin is so exciting, because people in the West can support people living in lower living conditions. They can support the same money that's supporting them, right? Once everyone, like if I'm on the Bitcoin standard and I'm supporting the Bitcoin price through my putting money into Bitcoin, and someone is living in Malawi and they are holding Bitcoin and they are using Bitcoin and they're accumulating Bitcoin, I am supporting them. You know, it aligns incentives in a very beautiful way that I think it actually, the fiat system cannot compete with it. So like one of the reasons I'm very optimistic on Bitcoin is I see Bitcoin as something that fiat cannot compete with, because Bitcoin is a fundamental realignment of incentives that ensure that the users of Bitcoin are in a better place because of the incentives, because of the system, and that people will start recognizing, oh, I would be better off if I just held Bitcoin instead of fiat. Like that is just continuously happening over time. And it's a one-way street. It's not going the other way. And I think like that is so optimistic for Bitcoin.
100%. And I have one question that I ask each and every one of my returning guests. And the question, for you, is what have you learned outside of Bitcoin since your last appearance on this podcast?
I've been just doing a lot of history research. So here, this book right here, that is Plutarch's Parallel Lives. Highly recommend it. Pretty much, ancient historian, ancient biographer, you know, wrote about a lot of the great Greeks and a lot of the great Romans, and he compared them, right? So he would like match Julius Caesar with a Greek, or he would match, you know, so he would match all of these like great Roman heroes and great Greek heroes, and he would compare them. He'd talk about their follies and their strengths, and you know what they did, you know, giving their scenarios. And I just think there's so much to learn about what's going to happen in the future by looking into the past. And there's so much to understand about where we're going by seeing where we came from. So I definitely recommend it. And, you know, the crazy thing is, like, Bitcoiners are very used to like this wide ranging, decentralized, you know, Bitcoin information ecosystem, right? Like there's so many Bitcoin podcasts and Bitcoin podcasters. It's like a meme, right? Well, there are more history podcasters. So if you ever have a hankering to like learn about ancient history, like there's a history podcast for every region, every timeline, you know, every angle it exists. There's so much there. And the old stuff is still good, right? It doesn't go bad. So the stuff recorded, you know, in 2007 is so fantastic. So, you know, highly recommend checking out like this, just the world of history information. It's really good stuff.
And I don't think there's enough Bitcoin podcasts, because there's still more TradFi podcasts out there. we have to beat them. And I think it's actually
they won't be able to compete with us for long, Robin. I'm pretty confident that we're going to outnumber them, and we're going to corrupt and convert them too.
I think so too. And then there's an interesting point coming where I think all the Bitcoin podcasts will no longer be Bitcoin podcasts, because it's just like Bitcoiners talking about all the interesting topics in the world. And then it's just like, oh yeah, like he's just a Bitcoiner, but he talks about interesting stuff. So it's like at some point, every podcast is a Bitcoin podcast, in some sense. I mean, it will probably takes a while till then, but, I think it has a similar evolution than, Bitcoin Treasury companies, maybe.
Look, number go up on all the metrics.
Yeah, that's very true. We have an end routine in the podcast where the previous guest is asking a question for the next guest without knowing who the next guest actually is. And the previous guest asked you the question, what are you currently building or creating for your own future self?
I guess I am building a reputation. So just continuing to hopefully do good work out in the public and show that good work, and then hopefully that pays off for me in the future.
Damn good reputation, I think, that you're building. So thank you so much for CK for being on the podcast. Before I let you go, where can people find you and ask you questions?
Yeah, you got to check me out on Nostr. So you can check out primal.net /CK, and then less often on Twitter. My handle there is at CK_snarks. And then I think the next event I'm going to be at is the Bitcoin conference in Vegas. HRF is going to be doing some cool stuff in Vegas for that event. That is in May, and then Oslo Freedom Forum, first week of June. In Oslo, we're going to have a very big freedom tech part of the agenda this year. So I think it's going to be really exciting, and a lot of people are going to want to go to that. So that's where you can find me in 2026.
Awesome. Thank you so much, CK, for being on the podcast. And also thank you so much for everyone that is watching and listening, for joining us today. As always, I'll be back tomorrow with another episode. Bye-bye. This content is for educational and entertainment purposes only and does not constitute financial advice.